And his kids, they love going to church and love all this stuff. And every Christmas, actually, they would get into the same argument they always got in. Like, oh, well, why don't you go to church? Why don't you go to the New Year's Eve service? It's a family thing. And he'd be like, ooh, I don't know about that. And then he'd go into this whole argument about how, well, I don't know if a God would care about us. We're so small. And then he'd start talking about, war and all of this other stuff. And he just really didn't get this whole God coming into human form stuff. I mean, it is weird. It's very weird stuff. And so his wife gave up, and she took the kids, and he said, okay, well, I'll wait up for you for when you come back, and we'll do Christmas here. So they went to church, and he sat in his armchair, and he was reading the paper, and he all of a sudden heard at their back glass door some thumping. He just heard something hitting the back door. And so he was like, well, let's go see what that is. And he put on his shoes, he put on his galoshes, he put on his coat, and he went to the back door and he saw these birds that had gotten caught in the winter snow. And they were huddled together to try to keep warm, and they were trying to fly through his glass back door to get into the house to be warm. So he went outside, and he noticed that the barn in his backyard was open, and it was full of warm, and it was inviting, and the birds could go in there, and they could feed, and they could be warm for the winter. And so he started trying to, rush them into the barn. But they just kept scattering all over the place, just scattering and flying everywhere. And so he said, okay, so let me take some bird feed and leave these breadcrumbs to the barn. And birds ignored the breadcrumbs, didn't even notice them. They were too busy flying into the glass door to notice breadcrumbs leading them to a warm barn. And so finally the man just got so frustrated, and he just started running and trying to pick up the birds and throw them into the barn, and it just didn't work. I mean, they're birds. And he sat there in the snow and he said, gosh, I don't know how I'm supposed to communicate with these birds. I don't know. I'm trying to help them, and I think the only way I can help these birds is if I were to become one, and if I were to chirp my way into telling them about this barn, and then they trust me because I was one of them. And he sat there and he stood there, and in the distance the church bells started to ring, and they announced the coming of Christmas. And Jesus ultimately led us to our barn which is safety in Him.
All right.
And we think of incarnation, and what I've come to realize about incarnation, what I've come to realize about what it means for Jesus to come here is that Jesus is the Word made flesh, and that religion and traditions and all of this stuff, they form a language, they form words that we speak. And even today, if I were to say a word that was completely different, that wasn't in the Christianese vocabulary, it would be weird. And Jesus came because religion made a system of these are the words we use. But Jesus is the Word made flesh, and He came into existence here to disappoint that whole system. Because even when He was here, chief priests and scribes were saying, you're not using the right language, you're not relating the right way. But He said, no, I'm here to experience this. I'm here to dwell with this. Jesus is not the reason for the season, He's the reason for the whole thing. And He dwelled with us. And so Christmas is, it can be contained when it's just 2,000 years ago in a manger, when it's God actively today coming here to dwell with us, to sit at our table, and constantly giving that invitation of sit with me.
Yes.
The world is a high school cafeteria, and everyone's in their cliques and their religions and their all of this stuff, but Jesus came and He sat at a table and He said, come, you can sit with me. You're not going to be judged. I've led breadcrumbs. I've come and all of this stuff, but I realized that I need to come here because you need to trust me, and I need to dwell with you so you can understand that I understand what you're going through. That's what Christmas is about.
Amen.
So don't just limit
Amen.
this whole Christmas stuff to December. Don't just limit
That's
Jesus to the reason for a season. He's the reason for the whole thing.
That's right.
He's the
Amen.
reason for the everyday.
That's right.
And he's constantly inviting us.
Yes.
And so when we see that he's inviting us, we can see other people who are out there who may not speak like us and may not think like us, and we can see that God is inviting them as well.
Yes.
And that we are that outstretched hand to our neighbor.
That's right.
And that's what that becomes. It doesn't become just a December where people are nice and warm. It becomes a lifetime of opening your arms to people who need the love of Jesus. Amen?
Amen.
It's so hard to end with closing remarks.